Republican Senator Tim Scott, who is heading up the committee in Congress to get Republicans elected Senate in 2026, has already met with who he is calling his top recruit. Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going over the news that Republican Tim Scott, senator from South Carolina, who is leading the Senate Republican campaign arm, has been meeting with who he's calling his top recruit for the 2026 Senate midterm cycle, and that is Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. The newly elected chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee met last week with the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, who is emerging as the top potential GOP recruit for the midterm elections as the party seeks a challenger to Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff, who is a Democrat from Georgia. Kemp is listening to Scott, and the two met ahead of the inauguration and have been frequently texting about this seat. Scott said, quote, "We are looking for a way to make our number one recruit a senator. He would be the best candidate in Georgia we've had for a very long time." Kemp said he is focused on his state legislative session and isn't in a rush to decide on a Senate run, according to a person familiar with his thinking. Until he makes a decision, though, he's likely to freeze the entire field in Georgia. If Kemp does say yes, after patching up his relationship with President Trump since their falling out over the 2020 election, it would be a very early boost for Scott as he settles into the Senate GOP's top campaign role. It was a job of many colleagues who were reluctant to entertain, given Republicans will have to defend 22 seats next year in 2026, in addition to the critical task of recruiting challengers to Democrats like Ossoff and Senator Gary Peters in Michigan, two of the top Republican targets in 2026. Scott must navigate a myriad of primary threats to his incumbents while working on deeper Republican structural issues and playing an integral role in selling Trump's agenda to the public. And the rest of the article goes on a little bit more about Senator Tim Scott. But this is very interesting, and it's one of the worst kept secrets that Brian Kemp is looked at as the top recruit for the 2026 Senate election in Georgia. And I'll be getting more to that in just one second, but first you may be wondering, okay, how did this all start? Well, it started back in the 2020 election, where we saw Joe Biden narrowly win the state of Georgia over Donald Trump by just about 12,000 votes. That, in combination with the other Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and other states like Arizona and Nevada, gave Joe Biden a narrow win over Donald Trump. At the Senate level, a very similar story. Republicans ended up narrowly losing the Senate 50-50, the Democrats having the tiebreaker due to Vice President Kamala Harris after winning, by winning two Georgia Senate races, one special election, and the current Senate race that's going to be up in 2026, with Democratic Congressman Jon Ossoff defeating Republican Senator David Perdue. And Jon Ossoff was able to win in a runoff election with 50.6% to Purdue's 49.4% due to the first election on November not having either candidate break 50%. David Perdue actually led on November and just nearly fell short of 50%. In the runoff, Ossoff was able to get more votes and win 50.6 to 49.4. Ossoff put up very strong numbers in Fulton County, this is where the city of Atlanta is, and a lot of the surrounding Atlanta suburbs that are brought up in every single election now, like Cobb County, Douglas County, Clayton County, DeKalb County, Gwinnett County, Forsyth, Fulton, and all the usual suspects here. So this is how this race ended up going blue nearly 6 years ago. This race is up once again in 2026. And Georgia, which we did just see in the presidential election in 2024, voted for Donald Trump by only 2 points, 51% to 49% over Kamala Harris. So Donald Trump did swing the state back to the Republican column, but still at only a 2% margin of victory was a very, very close state and will once again be a swing state both in 2026 and 2028. So Georgia, yes, it voted for Trump, but it's also still very close, which Republicans know going into 2026. They're going to be facing off against Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff. And for the Republicans to go up in this race and have a realistic chance at winning, they need the strongest recruit they could possibly get. Because Ossoff did just win against David Perdue last time, who was an incumbent senator. And it's very clear that Ossoff, I would say, probably has a good chance of winning against every Republican except for Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp is the governor of Georgia right now. He's had very high approval ratings as of a lot of recent approval polls. Everyone else I think does not give the name recognition, the fundraising to really make this a race Republicans can be truly confident they could win. That doesn't mean Republicans can't win the Senate race if Brian Kemp is not the nominee, but it is extremely less likely that they will do it. I honestly think if it's not Kemp versus Ossoff, I think Ossoff holds on to this race and wins. So you'll see people like Buddy Carter, a U.S. representative, showing interest in running, John King, another politician in Georgia, showing interest, as well as some other potential Republicans. But Brian Kemp right now, as Senator Scott said, is the top recruit, not just in the state of Georgia to run for the seat, but for every single potential challenger, Republican and maybe even Democratic alike. Brian Kemp is the top recruit for the 2026 cycle, for Republicans even having a chance to win the state of Georgia in 2026. And as I showed you, it's not going to be easy. As hypothetical polls have shown so far, there's only been one poll done, and it was a WPA Intelligence Republican-aligned poll. So again, take these numbers with a grain of salt. They're not the end-all, be-all. But every single Republican opponent versus John Ossoff is winning, and by a pretty substantial margin. Except when it comes to John Ossoff versus Brian Kemp, the poll's margin of error is 4.4%, but Kemp does hold a 6-point lead over Ossoff. So if you want to say at worst case scenario here, after factoring in the margin of error, that would give Kemp still a 2-point lead over Ossoff with 14% undecided. It is worth noting the other Republicans have a lot more undecided vote, and typically in a situation like this, that would probably benefit the Democratic incumbent. So it's pretty clear in the one poll that's been done so far. Again, it's the only poll, so only this is what we have to go off of. But Brian Kemp is the strongest Republican candidate to take on Ossoff. And it's interesting given Kemp's relationship with President Trump, which, as the article alluded to, was good when Trump helped him get elected in 2018, not so good in 2020 in the fallout of the 2020 presidential election. Kemp and Trump had a very strained relationship going into Kemp's reelection in 2022. Trump even endorsed David Perdue to run against Kemp in the primary and tried to get him out of office. Yet Kemp won the primary, won the general election in 2022, and in 2024, Kemp actually helped Donald Trump with his efforts in winning the state of Georgia in the 2024 presidential election. So now we come to 2026. Kemp will be term limited by Georgia's constitution, and he cannot run again for office. And that's what opens up the race for Senate. Kemp will be term limited, and he could run for the Senate seat without having to give up his post as governor. And really nets the Republicans one of the best opportunities they have for 2026. Right now, there's about 35 Senate seats up in the actually, I'll take Georgia off blue for now, just to show you. There's about 35 Senate seats up right now in the 2026 Senate elections. I could fill them all in and just give you a quick idea, but first, I'll show you right now. Georgia starts off. John Ossoff is currently the senator from Georgia. And if this is the only one, it'd be 35 Democrats, 31 Republicans. Let's say, hypothetically, Brian Kemp wins the state of Georgia and flips it red if he's the nominee. Well, what does that do? Right now, Democrats, I'm filling in all the states I project the Democrats to win in this election. And I'm also going to give a lot of the states that I think are going to stay Republican right now and leave a few toss-ups as well, just to show you how things are going. So I'm filling these in very, very quickly, how I think they are looking. I'm not doing any ratings on this one. I'm just doing the color of the party that's favored to win right now, in my view. So right now I have Republicans in this scenario getting about 52 Senate seats with Georgia going red. I'll take Georgia off red for just 1 second. Iowa, forgot to fill in red. So right now I have Republicans at 52, Democrats 44. Right now I think New Hampshire will be competitive, but I'll make it Democrat. Michigan, same thing, competitive, but I'll make it Democrat. North Carolina is tough because I think depending if the outgoing Democratic governor runs for the seat against Republican Tom Tillis, that could be a really close race that I could even potentially see going Democrat. But for right now, I'm going to put it as Republican for right now. Georgia would make this race a flip to the Republican side. Republicans would be net 1. This would have the Republicans at 54 Senate seats, Democrats at 46. And it's very important to note that Georgia, in my view, is the closest Senate race up in 2026. Even if Brian Kemp doesn't run, it's going to be the closest Senate race, but if he does run, I think it certainly is. The only other Republican targets realistically after Georgia are the state of Michigan, where it's Democratic incumbent Gary Peters, New Hampshire, where it's Democratic incumbent Jeanne Shaheen, and you maybe can throw in the state of Virginia if Republican outgoing Governor Glenn Youngkin runs for the Senate seat. I don't think it's still going to go red, even if he does run, but it'll make the race more competitive than an otherwise Virginia governor or Senate race usually would be. So Democrats will be on defense, and I think about 4 of these seats. However, the Democrats are also going to be targeting 2 very important Republican seats, one in the state of Maine with Susan Collins, and North Carolina with Tom Tillis. So right now, there's about 6 Senate seats in 2026 that I could potentially see being competitive. Again, I'm more so on the side of I think Virginia is not going to be a competitive race right now. I have not seen anything saying Glenn Youngkin's going to run for Senate in Virginia. So I'd really say there's about 5 Senate seats that I think are going to be competitive in 2026. Maybe there's some potential with the Ohio Senate race. If Sherrod Brown runs for the seat again, then you can maybe throw Ohio in there. But the point being, the Republicans, even if we say Ohio would be competitive, Republicans still have 50 Senate seats, which would be a majority in the Senate due to VP Vice President J.D. Vance breaking the tie. Georgia is a very important seat where the Democrats right now have, if Georgia stays blue, Democrats are up to 45. Republicans can still hold the Senate by winning any other one of these seats. And it's more likely than not they will do so, winning Ohio or North Carolina being the most likely of all of these. But let's say hypothetically Brian Kemp does defeat Jon Ossoff very narrowly and flips Georgia red. Well, this would put the Republicans with 51 Senate seats, Democrats at 44, without even filling in North Carolina, which I think is basically a coin flip at this time. Ohio, which I would say is likely Republican. Michigan, which is pretty much close to a coin flip, though the Democrat is probably narrowly favored. New Hampshire, which again is going to be competitive, but I think the Democrat is narrowly favored. And Maine, which is going to be very close, but I think Susan Collins, the Republican, is favored here. If Georgia goes red, let's say hypothetically Ohio stays red, North Carolina stays red, and Maine stays red. This would put Republicans up to 54. And if Republicans have maybe a really good night and get super lucky, and Michigan and New Hampshire in their best case scenario, they could conceivably get up to 56 Senate seats. But let's flip this. Let's say Democrats do very well and win Michigan and win New Hampshire, and I'm even going to give them North Carolina. Say they put up a really good candidate in North Carolina. This would still have the Republicans at 53, Democrats at 47. Okay, now let's say Susan Collins is really unpopular by Election Day. Maine's a Democratic state that just voted for Kamala Harris. Let's say Maine goes blue. Well, Brian Kemp winning the state of Georgia still helps Republicans significantly, having Republicans at 52, Democrats at 48. I don't envision a scenario, even with Sherrod Brown being the Democratic nominee, where Ohio goes blue, but let's say it does. Let's say Ohio, in some miracle, goes for the Democrats. Brian Kemp winning Georgia is once again a very crucial part of keeping the Senate in Republican hands. So you can go through as many favorable scenarios that you want for the Democrats. It sure is looking like Georgia is going to be one of the most important Senate races in 2026. And Brian Kemp running or potentially meeting with Tim Scott about running is a very important step for Republican chances at flipping the seat back. Because that's something that's very important to mention is right now, this is a Democratic seat. Jon Ossoff is the incumbent Democratic senators, and incumbents are very, very difficult to defeat, especially in a state as close as Georgia, which just elected Donald Trump over Kamala Harris by only 2 points. We did see some Democratic senators lose in 2024, like Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, and John Tester in Montana. But Trump won Montana by 20 points. He won Ohio by 11 points. Pennsylvania was the closest one of them all to flip. So the Pennsylvania presidential race and Senate race from 2024 is probably going to be the closest mirror to Georgia in 2026 in terms of if Brian Kemp runs, how could the Senate seat flip. But it's a very fascinating situation where we're starting to get some early signs of movement in the 2026 Senate races of which potential candidates could be running. Republicans and Democrats both trying to start landing their top recruits and building momentum for the midterm election. So I definitely can't wait to see how this all unfolds. That'll do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching and hope to see you in a future video. That will do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a like. And if you really liked it, please remember to click the subscribe button and make sure you turn post notifications on so you always get notified when I post a new video. That way you never miss one. Also, please remember to share this video with your friends and family if you really like the video. And remember to stay tuned because I'll be posting at least one video every single day leading up until Election Day. So I'd really appreciate it if you keep coming back and watching those videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.